The major thing that drew me to the film was the fact that it was another case of where a woman was airbrushed from the history of something because she didn't have a penis and was therefore dismissed.
Before we begin, I just wanted to share my best friend on the whole planet, Allie, was fortunate enough to have her daughter thanks to the magic of IVF last year.
Great.
On behalf of her and her husband and her daughter and her family, thank you for sharing the story because I think it's really important.
Great. Thank you.
So admittedly, before Allie started IVF, I really knew nothing about the process. I thought I did, but I didn't. I had no idea how many times a day she was going to have to inject herself, how painful it was going to be for her, the ups and the downs. So I'm curious to know, before you took on the role, how much did you know about IVF? And was there anything that you learned while researching for the film that you think would surprise people?
Same as you, I knew very little. I knew what it was. I knew what IVF stood for. But I didn't know the ins and outs. But when I got the role, I started researching, and there were like vlogs that I was watching on YouTube of women who were going through IVF and like the injections they were doing every day, and just the anticipation and the stress and the disappointment if it didn't work, the heartbreak if it didn't work. Yeah, there was a lot to learn.
I knew absolutely nothing about it before I started this film, really. I lived through it, but I don't think I paid much attention, and I can't remember anyway because I have a terrible memory. The things that shocked me, how arduous the process could be, and also the degree of opposition to it at the time, which was vicious, I mean, the newspapers called them Dr. Frankenstein, the church came out against them, their families didn't speak to them, they were given no help from the medical association, they did it all in temporary buildings around the back of Oldham Hospital, nothing in London, and that's kind of shocking. But then it shouldn't be, because it's, apart from anything, the general public could be forgiven because they were presented it in those terms as a kind of horror story, that they were playing God, they were doing the devil's work, they were fooling around with the natural way of things, and that we would all be punished, or the children would be born deformed or as mutants, so that there was a lot of scaring going on.
I didn't know much about the origin story. I knew more and more about the process of IVF just because, like you, I had friends and of that age where a lot of people I know have kids, and a lot of those kids are IVF babies. And I'm so grateful thinking about the kids I know who are only here because of IVF, like you, like Ali. It's just so humbling and just such a beautiful thing. Obviously, I'm a man, and I have not had to go through that sort of fertility journey myself, so it was all at one kind of a remove from me. So to then be invited into this story, both learning about the origin story and the cost these incredible scientists made in order to get through over the line, this greater good. But yeah, I mean, I went to an IVF clinic in London. The producers were brilliant, and they set me up with both an embryologist. We had this embryologist called Brooke Wilson, who was on set with us every day, helping us with the science. And so she was very much kind of our first port of call in terms of this world. But also going to the clinic, and the atmosphere of that place was really profound, because on the one hand you had this wall of babies, all these new lives which had been brought around by this science, coupled with this the undeniable truth that unfortunately not all IVF journeys end happily, and there is pain and there is disappointment along the way, and so it's all shades of humanity are in that clinic, and for someone who isn't going through the journey to be allowed into that space was real privilege, and I think really helped with us making the movie, the stakes of this story. Ben Taylor and his wife both have IVF children. Jack Thorne, Rachel Mason, the writers, their little boy Elliot was the 7th round of IVF. That personal journey is imbued in the movie, and us actors, I think we recognised the importance as a result.
Wow, that is so powerful, and I bet emotions must have been high at certain times during the film as well.
Yeah, they were. I mean, you can just tell, like this, particularly around like the ovum club and the moments of miscarriage and the ectopic pregnancy. As Jean says to Bob in the car, you don't care about the personal cost. You're only caring about the science. The science, and he then says, no, you're wrong, and he would then just list the whole ovum club. There was a sort of two parts to the story. One was the science, where we had Brooke advising us, and it was a bit like a kind of game almost, getting it right and all the specificity and the detail. And then there was this other side of it, which was just the human side, where we had the Ovum Club and we had these women who, apart from one, every woman in the film doesn't have a child, obviously Jean's mother, but otherwise they are all women who are dealing with fertility issues and don't have a child at the end. That side of the movie was just so moving, and it really brought home how many people, how many women in particular, have contributed to this. Because as Jean says, without you, none of this happens.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, IVF was obviously such a groundbreaking and controversial topic in the 1970s. We've come a long way in certain aspects, but there are certain countries and certain politicians that still want to have control over women's bodies in today's society. How do you think we can learn from the fight that they were doing back in the 70s as we continue to fight today?
What's really great about film is that you get to see a perspective that maybe you haven't gone through yourself or you don't understand. It allows people to feel empathy and to see an experience. And I hope that people see how important it is for women to have choice and autonomy over their own bodies, and also just the love that went into it, the love that comes out of it. Yeah, just to get a better understanding of what the process is and how vital it is to so many people.
The fact that IVF is now a hot political issue in certain parts of the world was not the case when the film was made. So it wasn't made in response to that or, in anticipation of that. But the fact that it's timed out that way is obviously desirable for everyone, because I think to have a film, to have a dramatization of the events in a way that's palatable to everybody, so people can take a look and hopefully it will help clarify their thinking on it.
That's a very, very good question, and a huge question. The conversation I'm having around this movie, which of course was never intended to be a politically motivated movie. It was 10 years in development. It was always a pure celebration of Jean Purdy in particular, rectifying the lack of credit she was given. Patrick Steptoe, Bob Edwards, that was the story. It has now come out at a time when we are facing a very sinister threat to the progress that has been made over the last 50 years. I guess the big takeaway for me in this kind of conversation is how fragile that progress is. I felt like I've been privileged enough to live in a country at a time when choice has been available, both in terms of IVF and reproductive rights for women, and I kind of took it for granted. And then over the last couple of years, since Roe v. Wade was decimated, and now IVF seems to be used in a political arena in a very sinister way as well, in a kind of cynical way. It's very scary how fragile that work is, and when you look at as I said before, the kind of cost that those women gave and those scientists, for it all to be for nothing, for us to then just regress so quickly, just seems so tragic. So it was fragile then. Unfortunately, it's fragile now. I thought that we had come further. We haven't. This film, whilst it's not a politically motivated movie, will hopefully be a catalyst for the right type of conversation and will be a celebration of that cost, and hopefully will remind us what has gone before us and what we must protect.
Now, the director of the film, Ben Taylor, recently said in an interview, "Going to the moon is one thing, but what they did is more important in regards to the three scientists you each play." So this really stood out to me because one is visually so grand, the idea of sending a rocket ship into space and going to the moon, compared to, I guess, in theory, scientists working in a lab, yet creating the miracle of life. So what do you think about Ben's statement?
I think his statement is pretty. I'll stand with him.
Yeah.
In human terms, that's pretty. It's a major thing. There are now apparently 16 million women who have children who would not have had children had these three people not persevered.
Yeah.
That's pretty something.
I love Ben's statement, and it was in The Guardian recently, wasn't it? I mean, it made the headline. I loved it. The reason why the moon was referenced was because he would talk about The First Man, the Ryan Gosling movie, and he used it as a template, as Jack used sports movies as a template for this, as a sort of inspiration. So that was the kind of reference point for the moon. When I read that this film was about three scientists looking into microscopes, prodding at petri dishes, I genuinely thought, how on earth is this going to be a movie? Like, where's the drama? Where's the emotional kind of heart of it? You're right, it doesn't involve rockets and outer space travel and this kind of colonizing of a planet. But for me, you know, we all know about the moon landing. How much did it affect us emotionally? Not that much. Seen the pictures, know that we went to the moon, great. The number of people I know, parents like you, like Ali, who have children, I now know human beings who live in this world, who I interact with, who I now love. You know, these people are more valuable to me. So I fully agree with him. And for me, and the most hard-hitting sort of gasp out loud moment of the whole film really is the statistic at the end, when you've got 12 million IVF babies, like 12 million people. It's nuts. Like, you see these horrific statistics around war and genocide and how many millions of people have been wiped off this planet. Rarely do you see the opposite of that, the antithetical kind of, this has created 12 millions of lives. Like, where do you see that apart from something like IVF? It's one of the most beautiful pieces of science ever.
I agree. Now, I'm no scientist. I do not plan on making any scientific breakthroughs in my own personal life.
Neither.
Yet there are still some really strong messages in the film that I took away. You know, the idea of pursuing something that you feel passionate about and surrounding yourself with people who also believe in the same things as you to make it happen. So what are some of the other messages you want people to take away from Joy?
Yeah, finding things that you feel is passionate about, that kind of like fuel you and that bring you joy and pride and excitement to be a part of. Working for something that may not benefit you now, but could have a huge impact on people in the future.
Yeah, I get that.
I guess forward thinking,
Yeah.
like what the women in the Ovum Club, the women who were the first ones to go through the, you know, injecting the hormones, and that helped, you know, allow for the success of IVF, allow IVF to happen, like what they sacrificed. They weren't necessarily doing it for themselves. So a lot of them knew that it wouldn't work for them, but they knew that it could work for someone else, someone in the future, and how much of an impact they could have. I think that's a message to take from it, one of many.
The major thing that drew me to the film was the fact that it was another case of where a woman was airbrushed from the history of something because she didn't have a penis and was therefore dismissed. These are recent events, you know, and I mean, it still goes on. And I think anything that that's in vigorous opposition to that, the idea that there is, you know, that women are inadequate in any regard, particularly with their intelligence, is just, you know, it's good. It's a good thing.
Yeah, I totally agree. Well, thank you so much for your time and congratulations. Pleasure to meet you.
Thank you.
Pleasure speaking with you. It's great.
Thank you so much.